If you're an author and you're worried that you're never going to sell a book and that you're going to be a failure forever, do not worry, because I used to live in a shed with no running water, and now I travel wherever I want. I drive a Mercedes, and I have a studio in my home for my content, and I literally do whatever I want all of the time ever since I became a six-figure author, which didn't happen when I initially started to succeed. I've also helped over 2,000 authors go full-time with their career. So let's go back a minute, because I did not start out being rich and famous and dodging the paparazzi, okay? I started out in 2019 writing very niche queer YA kind of romance, leaning more urban fantasy with a bit of romantic subplot, and I totally failed. I had no idea what I was doing. I was trying to do all of my marketing through Facebook when none of the younger audience was on Facebook. I really truly had no idea what I was doing, and I published several books in this genre that never made me any money, and I tried to pivot into contemporary romance at that time and designed this cover for a book that was super spicy, which made a lot of people very angry because this is not the cover for a spicy romance book. So a lot of people who were expecting sweet, non-spicy got a lot of spicy, and so that venture failed as well. But towards the end of 2019, I found an author who posted about writing RH, which is a specific genre of romance where one woman has multiple boyfriends and they are all totally cool with it. It is a form of poly romance, but it tends to be very specifically one woman with multiple men, and then I took a poly spin on mine when I started publishing that. Because I was like, man, having the constant attention of multiple dudes sounds exhausting. They also need to give each other attention. So I started publishing that at the very beginning of 2020, and it did really, really well. My first book, in the first 3 days it was out, made me $600. And then a month later, I released the second book. I had already finished writing books 1 and 2 before I started releasing, so that I could use what was called a rapid release strategy, which is where you release books very close together, usually about a month or so apart. So then I released book 2, and that brought my income up to $5,000 a month, if I'm remembering correctly. Here's my actual chart. And then as my books kept coming out, my income kept going up. My absolute peak month in 2020 was $10,000, or at least pretty damn close to it. And that was more money than I had ever made in my entire life. That was more money than my husband and I had ever made combined in our entire life. And we used to be over-the-road truckers. If you're not super familiar, blue-collar jobs tend to pay a lot of money, but it's a lot of work. And I was really sick of doing a ton of work for any amount of money. I just wanted to do a normal amount of work for a crap ton of money, or very little work for a crap ton of money, which is what I do now. But back to 2020. I will say, I didn't realize it at the time, but everything I did was luck. That first series to come out was my Drakus Clan series, which I published as Alexis Pierce. This is a full series edition, so this is all 5 books. And the reason it worked is because I was unknowingly using concepts of universal fantasy. I talk about T. Taylor a ton. Make sure to check it out. This isn't an ad for her. I literally just love her stuff, and it changed my life. So I was unknowingly using these concepts of universal fantasy for these books, and this involved my character being a lost dragon princess, so she was torn out of a very comfortable world that maybe wasn't great, but she was used to it, and thrust into this world of magic and hot guys and wealth and luxury and all of this, which is a very big universal fantasy concept. And then I had all of these other tropes that were big universal fantasies, like the grumpy guy who hates everyone, cares for her, that kind of stuff. So that series did really, really, really well, but I made a huge mistake when it came to my next series. If you go on sites like Amazon and Goodreads, you can actually read reviews for any book that's available on those sites. Goodreads, I think, has every book in the world, if I'm not mistaken, and therefore you can find reviews for pretty much every book in the world. And I made the horrible mistake as a newbie author of reading my reviews. And the biggest complaint I had, despite the smashing success of this series and how much I loved writing about a young woman who, when she transformed, turned into a rose gold dragon, because I was like, you know what? She loves pink. I love pink. Let's make her a pink dragon. Why the hell not? But I listened to people too much when they said, oh, well, she's so weak and wimpy at the beginning and I'm so sick of her. And I was originally writing her because I wanted her to start out being, you know, pretty incapable, being a normal person, and then getting better from there and like scaling and finding her courage and finding her confidence. And a lot of people didn't like that. And by a lot of people, I mean I got like 2 or 3 reviews and I took them way too much to heart. So then what ended up happening is I was like, you know what, for my next series, I'm going to correct that. I'm going to write a lady who's a badass from day one. And that series tanked. That series still doesn't make me any money. And it's not just because she's a badass from day one, but it's for a few reasons. The first is that I didn't feel super passionate about the main character because she's not the type of main character that I would otherwise like to write. That's just not the type of character I personally prefer to write about. And so I wasn't passionate about the project. I couldn't get books out on time. I couldn't bring myself to rapid release, and my release schedule was delayed, and it ended up taking me 2 years to get that series out when I actually started another series within that saga, because I wrote a bunch of these books that are all in the same shared universe. And I wrote an entire other series in that saga in the course of a few months by returning to my roots, by returning to this heroine who maybe wasn't super capable, wasn't super confident, and then grows to be more so throughout the series. But that second series did really badly, and I for sure liked to blame it on the fact that it was true poly romance, that she wasn't just surrounded by guys who were obsessed with her. She also had 2 girlfriends by the end of the series, and one of them was literally like, yes, I'm super into you, but I really don't have that much time to commit. And she was like, yeah, that's cool. I've got these other people. And they were like, yeah, cool. Sounds like a plan. And I liked to blame it on the fact that there was FF in those series, but really the problem with the series was that I wasn't passionate about it. I didn't care about it. I didn't care about my main character, and I didn't apply those universal fantasy concepts. So it ended up being really, really difficult to market. I started getting anxious. My income started going down when I started publishing that series. Because like I said, I made $10,000 in 1 month, and then the next month I made $7,000, and then the next month I made like $6,000 and then $5,000. Like, it kept going down and I was freaking out. So then let's move on to 2021, the year I lost my house. So in 2020, I did a whole blog post for my favorite blog, Making Sense of Sense, and talked about all of the success and how I used publishing to succeed. And when I realized, like, this isn't sustainable, I'm not making enough money, my husband has had to go back to work, I'm pregnant and dealing with all of these like medical issues while being pregnant, and it was a nightmare. It was so horrible. 2021 and 2022 are some of the worst years of my life. And I know I should say, well, I had a healthy child and I should have appreciated it a lot more, but really I was stressed all the time. I was super depressed. I didn't have all that much help at home because my husband was at work all the time, and I know that's the situation for millions and millions of people, and that it's super privileged that I was able to stay home. But the problem for me wasn't that I was able to stay home, it's that I was forced to stay home. Because when you don't have qualifications that lead to decent work, you don't have a choice. And that's something a lot of people in higher tax brackets don't realize, and people who've never been in this situation don't realize. If you make like $1,500 a month, you can't afford not to stay home because you have a kid to take care of, and you can't afford daycare. And honestly, daycare is a stretch anyway, because most jobs aren't 9-to-5 jobs when you're in that tax bracket, when you're making so little money. You're not working a 9-to-5 job, you can't do a 9-to-5 daycare, you don't have options for childcare. So overall, those years really, really sucked, and they were miserable, and I felt horrible the whole time. And towards the end of 2022, I was at my lowest point. We had lost our house because we couldn't afford our rent anymore. Our car had basically imploded on itself. The transmission went out while we were driving it, and so we had to get a new car and have payments when our previous car had been paid off, but there was no way to get the repairs done. The repairs were worth more than the car was, and they were too extensive. So we were going into debt, we were miserable. And then in August of 2022, my laptop, my life, literally how I functioned and how I got work and how I made money, my laptop died. My laptop stopped functioning completely. It was a 4-year-old MacBook Pro, and everybody knows that like MacBooks can be great, but sometimes they have a very specific lifespan on them, and that one happened to be 4 years, and it crashed, and I lost everything. Thankfully, I had backups and I had digital backups because everything went into the cloud. Some people complain about the cloud, but I'm not going to complain about the cloud because it saved my business. I would not have been able to recover my business if it had not been for my digital backup. So always back up your shit. And at the end of the year, I was truly at my lowest point. It was very, very bad for my mental health and my physical health. Everything was horrible. And one of my friends who was an author said, hey, would you be willing to post on my TikTok? I already have the content. Now, I knew that a lot of people were doing really well with TikTok from their books. I knew that this friend was doing really well from her one TikTok account, but she wanted more accounts running. So I said, you know what? Yeah, I'll do that. She was going to pay me enough to replace my computer. Not to replace my computer with like a top of the line brand new MacBook Pro, but I was able to get a functioning computer that could run the software that I needed to run my business. And for that, I will forever be grateful because that changed the course of my life. Because not only was I posting on her stuff, but I started to get the confidence to post my own TikToks about my own books. So then that leads us to 2023. I was posting on TikTok consistently and my friend said, hey, do you want another client? And I said, that sounds terrible because I actually don't like doing client work for individuals, like individual client work. That's a nightmare for me. It stresses me out, makes me so anxious, but I was broke as shit, so I said yes. And then I kept taking clients and I kept taking them and almost wrecked that entire business, which freaked me out, and I slowed down a lot, but I had savings at that point. I had never had savings in my life, but I had been making so much money from my books that I hit 6 figures without even realizing it in 2023. It wasn't until I was going over my stuff at the beginning of 2024 that I realized, oh shit, I made 6 figures. And that changed everything because I realized like I wasn't just good at my job. I was good at helping other people because in 2023, another thing that I did is I took all of this knowledge from running TikToks for other people and then from training authors individually to run TikTok accounts. I took all of this knowledge and condensed it down into a course. And like, yes, you can complain about courses. No, you don't have to take my course. This isn't an ad for my course. But I took all of that knowledge and started showing that course, and people loved it, and people started making so much money. And I realized that not only was I able to sell my own books and change my life by selling my books, but I was able to help other people change their lives. And the reason for this story is that I need you to know that you might be at your lowest point. You might think that you peaked a year ago or 2 years ago or 10 years ago, but it's not the end. Things can always get better. Things can always improve. You just have to do the work. You have to figure out what people are doing to succeed and do it. You can't be scared to jump into it, because if I hadn't been so scared to jump into it back in 2020 when everybody else was jumping into it, I would have made a lot more money. I would have never had that crash, even with the books I was writing not being like my absolute passion. I wouldn't have had that crash. But if I hadn't had that crash, things wouldn't be where they are now. Things wouldn't have changed so drastically for me. I wouldn't have been able to help thousands and thousands of authors with their careers. So despite how terrible it was, despite how miserable I was for the first year of my son's life, I don't regret it. It fucking sucked. The things in my life sucked, but I don't regret it. And I wouldn't change a thing because I have been able to help not just myself and get myself a deep understanding of marketing so that I know that I'll never make less than $10,000 a month ever again, but I've been able to help so many people. So just know, if you feel like this is the end and you're miserable and nothing is working and it's all terrible, it's not the end, it's the beginning. And you just have to believe that there are so many great things to come. If you do want to learn how to do all this, make sure to check the link in the description.